Hi guys, I'm Cesar, and today I will be refuting the claim that video games do not cause violence and are a source of stress relief, sort of a rehabilitation. So the advocate supported their claims by first stating that killing an NPC in a game is not the same as killing a real person in life. An NPC is a non-player character which often has human form. And their second secondary claim was that violent games or regular video games are a source of stress relief and rehabilitation. So in response to these claims, to the first claim that killing an NPC in a game is not the same as killing a real person in real life, she presents the case that Evan Ramsey in high school in Alaska killed 2 and wounded 2. She presented some Supreme Court data that they cited that his claim that he did not understand that if I pull out a gun and shoot you, there's a good chance you're not getting back up. But Evan himself clearly claimed that he was influenced by the video game Doom. Secondly, there has been also scientific research in 2010 reported by psychologist Craig Anderson at the Iowa State University. And this was a meta-analysis examining 130 international studies with over 130,000 participants. He reported that exposure to violent video games caused both short-term and long-term aggression in players and decreased empathy and pro-social behavior. The study analyzed kids ranging from ages 8 to 16, and in every group, children who were exposed to more video game violence did become more aggressive over time than their peers who had less exposure. This was true even after the researchers took into account how aggressive the children were at the beginning of the study, a strong predictor of future bad behavior. All right, and secondly, her second secondary point was that violent games or regular video games are sort of a stress relief and rehabilitation. And to this point, I kind of see it as we all believe that some games can help educate and help with other issues such as weight loss. There is really no debate here. But this means that video games can also work as a form of desensitization. Julia Shaw, who is a psychology professor in the United Kingdom, states that there is strong evidence to suggest a link between engagement with violent media and aggressive behavioral tendencies. Playing violent video games has been shown repeatedly to be a causal risk factor for increased aggressive behavior, aggressive thinking patterns, and aggressive emotions. Coupled with a decrease in empathy, together these kinds of increased antisocial tendencies could certainly increase an individual's risk for engaging in gun violence. So in conclusion, violent video games have not been directly linked to causing violence, but to say that violent video games have no effect on violence is simply false. Violent video games have proven to increase aggressive behavior and cause less empathy for their users. Violent video games are a piece of a big puzzle that causes individuals to commit acts of violence and therefore should not be ignored. Thank you.
All right, Cesar, you identified the main proposition, although it did sound like it had 3 or 4 component parts to it. That may have been the advocate's fault in this situation. Then you label what the secondary issues were going to be. You went right to that first example. It was a little bit confusing because the advocate cites the example and you're citing the example, and it sounds like they're both reaching different conclusions, and I think you need to explain a little bit in context what the advocate said the example proved, because if Ramsey himself said that he was influenced by playing the violent video games, and the advocates made the argument that said, no, he made the claim, but there was no reason to believe it, or there's no other corroborating evidence, or it was said 10 years after the event took place. This sounds to me like it's a little bit late in the process. I think I think it needed to be clarified a little bit more. I don't remember the context. I don't remember exactly what the evidence was, and that's why you need to do a little bit more contrast with the advocate's way of interpreting those arguments. The counter evidence that you provided on this particular point was fine. You've got a study that involved a lot more people. You give an explanation about how this aggregate study was going to get us a different outcome. That it did in fact have an impact over time. I don't know how you measure those impacts, but it did sound like it was at least fairly convincing. On the second point, you basically concede the notion that there is some advantage to some of these video games because maybe people are getting exercise if they're doing, I assume it's like one of those dance things, DDR or something like that. The second argument about desensitization, I think, is probably the more direct counterclaim that's going to get you something, because that ties in with the argument on the first point. And I think that you could put those things together a little bit more effectively and for instance, go back and say, so if we are desensitized and we increase aggression, that's likely to give us a more dangerous situation than we had otherwise. And I thought you did that kind of at the end of the speech, but I think you could be doing it and building the argument too. Like I said, I thought the summary was pretty solid. All right. Thank you.